Cyberpunk 2077 has got to be the biggest game release of 2020, and as we found in a previous video, it's really difficult to get running. So naturally, we thought of trying to run it on a MacBook. Now, not any MacBook will do the trick. In fact, any MacBook without a dedicated GPU is simply not going to run the game. Just take our word for it. We've tested the game with the Intel integrated UHD 630 on desktops, and we're getting a maximum of 10 FPS. Although the Iris Plus graphics found in MacBooks are better, they're still hopeless as they're constrained by TDP and thermals. And the new M1 Max, it's gonna be difficult to get the game up and running with software compatibility issues. Being so, my personal laptop, a 2016 13-inch touch bar model, is out of the question. And so are all other MacBooks besides the 15 or 16-inch Pro models. So we're sorry to get you students' hopes up. If you wanted to play on your school laptop, we had to bring out the big guns. A 2019 model 16-inch MacBook Pro with upgrades. In terms of specs, it features an upgraded Intel Core i9-9880H processor with a 2.3 GHz base clock and what Apple and Intel claim to be 4.8 GHz boost. Having 8 cores with hyperthreading and built on the 14nm Coffee Lake architecture, it's still quite the beast, even if that max turbo is kind of just a dream. It's paired with 16GB of 2666 MHz RAM and a 1TB NVMe SSD. And the part that runs the show, an AMD Radeon 5500M with 8GB of GDDR6 VRAM. This GPU performs similarly to a desktop RX 470, and it has massive amounts of VRAM for pro workloads, so let's see how it runs Cyberpunk. Now, as an Apple laptop, you'll have to get Windows installed first using Boot Camp, which shouldn't be too difficult. Then, since Apple's default Windows GPU drivers are pretty bad and outdated for gaming, and AMD doesn't offer drivers for the 5500M on their website, we had to go install drivers from this website. Then we installed Mac Fan Controller and set the fans to max. It'll be loud, but the default fan curve just won't do the trick. Finally, we're ready to play the game. All tests were conducted at 1080p. We did test 720p briefly, but the FPS didn't go up due to a CPU bottleneck. The game is being played on an external screen recorded with a capture device. Crowd density, a setting that's not in the graphics menu, but it does impact performance, it is set to low. To keep the results constant, we try to use a similar route each time when driving around the city. To be honest, the results really surprised us. At the lowest setting with 100% resolution scale, the game is perfectly playable at an average of 49.6 FPS. However, we do see dips and micro stutters since our 1% low is 33.8 and our 0.1% low is only 5.1. How about 60 FPS then? Easy, as we found this setting in the menu, Fidelity FX, the AMD version of DLSS. Well, it seems to us like it does nothing except normal upscaling because there's barely any improvement in image quality. However, it's super convenient still because by setting a target FPS and a minimal resolution, the game will dynamically change the resolution automatically to maintain the desired frame rate. And it does work. With a minimal resolution, we hit an average of 59.3 FPS without losing too much graphics quality. 1080p 60 FPS on a MacBook and the game still looks great even on low settings, which is very nice. Although there's still the issue with the microstutter as the CPU is throttling. Now, how about if we target 30 FPS? How high can we raise the settings? Without dynamic resolution, the game hit a solid 37.2 FPS average. The medium setting looks significantly better and definitely beautiful. It may not appear very clear on video as the capture card lost a bit of quality and YouTube compression took another toll, but anyways, this means we can go higher. Let's try the high preset. Again, with 100% resolution, we hit 28.8 FPS, which is very close to 30. Turning on dynamic resolution, and since we only need a little more FPS, we can set a minimum of 90%. Sure enough, it works. We have an average of 30.4 FPS. And what about Ultra? We get a cinematic experience of 23.5 FPS at 100% resolution scale. It isn't playable and there's really great input lag, but hey, I still drive okay. After some experimentation, I found a minimal resolution of 70% that works well. But first of all, let's appreciate this game's next-gen physics. Introducing Superman vs. Car. Okay, with that out of the way, we got an average of precisely 30 FPS. However, I don't recommend doing this over playing at high with minimal resolution of 90%, as upscaling just doesn't look that good. Now let's talk about CPU throttling. All of the results above are run with stock settings, no throttle stop or other CPU tweaks. Unfortunately, those programs won't help you a lot in this situation, as we need every bit of GPU performance. At least to our understanding, if the CPU uses any more than 20 watts, the GPU will throttle really heavily. Again, we believe that the GPU throttles by 5 watt intervals, and each 5 watt decrease will result in significant decrease in core clocks. By default, the CPU turbos to about 1.9 to 2.1 GHz at 20 watts, and that's basically it. Whatever you set in throttle stop will only boost the clock by 100 to 200 MHz max. Undervolting didn't work either, as Apple seemed to lock it. We did test with a similar program similar to throttle stop, Quick CPU, which basically does the same thing, and set a minimum turbo of 2.0 and a preferred turbo of 2.3 GHz. At fixed 100% resolution scale, it did 51.2 FPS, a 1.6 FPS increase, which just doesn't seem worth it. And that's why we didn't try this with any other settings, as turning up the graphics options only decreases the CPU bottleneck. Now, what about playing on the laptop's internal screen? Mostly, you should expect the same results. However, due to unknown reasons, it seems like the GPU is throttling more than it was before. For example, it throttles to 35 watts right now, which we don't think happened with the external display. Our guess is the bright retina screen uses 10 watts and it stresses the laptop's VRM more. In one occasion off camera, we experienced serious throttling when using the internal display, with FPS dropping to less than 20. Just a heads up if you want to use the built-in screen. So as you can see, this MacBook is probably one of the few configurations of Mac that can run the game. Firstly, as we said before, any iGPU MacBook is out of the question. Then the 15-inch MacBook Pros have at best usable GPUs that are at least 30% worse than the 5500M. The 5300M as well in the 16-inch MacBook Pros is 28% slower, and most models only have half the VRAM, although VRAM shouldn't be a huge issue as the game will optimize more efficiently if you have less. And of course the 5600M will be able to do it, but that thing is extremely expensive. As for the CPU, we personally believe it'll actually run better with the 6-core i7 models. Pretty much all games, including Cyberpunk 2077, need frequency and IPC more than core count. As we can see before, the CPU needs to be limited to 20 watts for the GPU to use the full 50 watt power target. Having 2 more cores means less frequency on all the cores at the same power, and having the CPU running at less than 2 GHz or less is pretty bad for the frame rate and bad for overall smoothness. So by the end of all of this, what did we gain? Well, we succeeded in our original goal of playing Cyberpunk on a MacBook. It's truly impressive that the MacBook can run this at decent settings and pack as much power as some lower-end gaming laptops, like the ones with GTX 1650s, while still being very slim and lightweight. But you shouldn't buy this MacBook just to play games. First of all, it costs over $3,000 new, and with the release of M1 Macs, it's also kind of obsolete. Then, kind of obviously, Macs are not built for gaming. Heck, it even has the word Pro in its name, designed for professionals like video editors, not gamers. We had to install Windows, third-party drivers, and the fan screamed the whole time, and the temperature soared. Then we have this weird throttling issue with the internal screen. But all of this proved one thing, that you can play Cyberpunk on a Mac. It works if you're in a pinch, but don't expect it to work well. Even a mid-end $700 PC could do better. That's all for today's video. If you liked it, please leave a like and please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.